Hello everybody, welcome back to another MB Zoomer video. Today we're going to be talking about Sur Ron 2022 Buyer's Guide. So if you're in the market for a Sur Ron this year, this is going to be an overview of what's upgraded on the 2022 version if you buy new, and things to look for in your buying process, and then we're going to get into some alternatives to the Sur Ron at the end as well. Before we get into the video, I would like to give a shout out to another YouTube channel. He's got a couple Sur Ron videos. The channel is Aaron Medvitsky. He has a really interesting video about putting a dirt bike fork, a Yamaha fork I believe, on a Sur Ron. So this sort of touches on my previous video about Sur Ron fork upgrades. He's giving you some other options outside of what I mentioned, and it's really some interesting stuff. He knows a lot more about just forks in general than I do, so I would highly recommend checking out his channel, which I will link in the description. I would also like to ask, if you're watching and feeling generous, please leave a like on this video and subscribe to my channel to catch any future videos. We're going to have some good stuff coming out in the near future. So, as I said, I'm trying to give a buyer's guide here. So let's get into what is upgraded on the 2022 Sur Ron if you were to buy new from Luna. So one of the major upgrades here, well, maybe not an upgrade, but one of the major differences is the Fast Ace inverted fork pictured in the top right there. This fork, if you watch my fork video, you know my opinions about inverted forks. Maybe they're wrong. I've never tried one, but I'm not a huge fan. However, it seems like this fork is going to be pretty comparable to the RST Killa and D&M Volcano forks. It costs about the same, and from what I can see, it's got similar reviews. It's a little more similar to a dirt bike fork, but I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say it's probably more or less equivalent to the previous forks that have come stock on the Sur Ron, which is to be expected when you're buying a fork or a dirt bike in this price range. You're just not going to get state-of-the-art suspension for $4,000. Another thing that Luna lists as an upgrade on the 2022 version is a sine wave controller. I'm not real knowledgeable about different controller tunes for the Sur Ron, so I'm not going to go very in-depth about that, but Luna lists it as a feature on the newest version of this bike. Another thing they list is the grips, as you'll see in the center picture there. However, these look like the same grips that came on my Sur Ron stock. I believe mine was the 2020 version, so not really sure if that's an actual upgrade. And you can buy different grips on Amazon for $15. Top of the line grips for $15. Another, in my opinion, sizable upgrade they made was an upgraded headset. So top left there is a photo of that. Those are basically the bearings that connect the fork to the frame of the bike, and those are going to be really important in how smooth your bike handles. So this is an upgrade that a lot of people suggest getting right off the bat when you get your Sur Ron. It's supposed to be much more robust than the stock on previous models, so I'm happy to see that Luna is providing them with the newest model of the Sur Ron. So let's talk about buying new versus used Sur Ron electric bikes. There are several benefits and disadvantages to both options. As you can see on the left, the stock photo of the 2022 Sur Ron from Luna. And then on the right you have a upgraded and used Sur Ron. So you're going to have different benefits and pitfalls to each one. You may notice on this on the photo on the right, the fork, to me that looks like a Fox 40 fork, which is an $1,800 fork and a very substantial upgrade to the bike. So in this case, you might want to consider buying used because you're getting a very good value of parts It depends what they're charging, of course, but typically you're going to be able to find a used Sur Ron for about the same price as a new one if it has upgrades. If it doesn't have upgrades and it has a bunch of miles, probably less. It's just totally dependent on your specific situation and which used dirt bike that you're looking at. Something you do have to watch out for is previous damage to a used bike. So it's a pretty safe bet that if you're buying a used bike, it's probably been dropped before. It's probably gone a decent amount of miles, so you might have some damage on there that isn't immediately apparent when you're checking it out before you buy. So if you're buying used, just be prepared. There might be some repairs you need to make that the previous owner missed or neglected to repair before selling it. So that's something to watch out for. However, you may be able to get some of that value back with upgrades that the previous owner put on it. If you do buy new, you're going to get a fresh bike, never been dropped before. But if it's your first electric bike, your chances are you're going to drop it at some point. So it's all just dependent on your specific situation and what models you're looking at and all that stuff. So you really have to evaluate it based on what bike you're looking at. Do some research, but this video should give you a good starting point to figure that out. So getting on to price. What price should you pay for a Sur Ron? So Luna is selling the 2022 model for $4,200. I'm not sure if that includes shipping or not, but it's gonna be dependent on just where you get it from. So Luna has one price. Other vendors have different prices. It's very variable, but $4,200 is about what you can expect a new Sur Ron to be worth in 2022. If you're buying used, they may list it for less or more, depending on what kind of upgrades they put on it, how many miles are on the bike, the condition of the bike. Another thing I forgot to mention that you should keep in mind when looking at used bikes is the miles on the bike and on the battery, because as I mentioned in my battery video, which I will also link in the description, you're gonna only get about 1,000 charge and discharge cycles out of that battery. So if somebody's already put 10,000 miles on your bike and on the battery, you're probably not going to get too many more charge discharge cycles before you start noticing a decrease in performance. So that's something you should factor into the price, because replacing the battery is going to be, I would budget about $1,500 for that. So something to keep in mind if you're looking at buying used. You can find all different configurations. So I would say your baseline is going to be about $4,000. So buying used, the main places to look if you want to buy a used Sur Ron are going to be Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. Of course, this is where you buy most used items nowadays, but eBay might have a few listings, but you're going to have to pay for shipping, which is not going to be cheap, and that's probably going to make up the difference between the deal you got on a used Sur Ron versus just buying a new one. So I would suggest keeping with these two. Keep it local. Another benefit of buying used is that you can take the bike home. You'll pay somebody in cash for it and take the bike home with you. If you're buying new, you're going to have to wait a few months until the back order clears up, and then you're going to have to wait even more time for it to ship to you. So buying used is a little bit more gratifying because you can instantly get what you paid for. There are also Facebook groups I've found dedicated solely to reselling used Sur Rons. However, it seems like most of these groups are based out of California, so if you're not living near California and not willing to pay for shipping, this might not be a great option for you, but it couldn't hurt to check it out. So you can just find that by searching Facebook Sur Ron group, and I'm sure it'll be your first Google result. So now getting on to other options, I'd like to talk about a quick comparison between Sur Ron and buying a gas-powered dirt bike. I'm probably going to piss off a bunch of people here, but this is just my opinion on some of the differences between the two. I'm not saying one is better than the other. They're both good at accomplishing different tasks, and it really depends on your use case and your priorities in an electric dirt bike or a gas dirt bike, whatever you choose to go with. There's going to be benefits and disadvantages to each. So let's talk about the Sur Ron first. Compared to a dirt bike, you're going to get less range and less power in general. A lot of people say the Sur Ron is roughly equivalent to about a 100 to 150 cc dirt bike. However, it's not a good analogy to make between the two because they operate completely differently and the power is delivered very differently. So a stock Sur Ron is not going to perform like a 100cc dirt bike because they just inherently operate in very different ways. However, with a dirt bike, you're typically going to get more range out of them just because you can hold more gas. Gas has a higher energy density than you're going to get in your lithium battery pack. So that might be something to consider. If you want to do long haul trips, don't buy a Sur Ron because you can really only expect to get about 20 to 30 miles out of it in sport mode. So I don't recommend if you plan on traveling from city to city, sort of cross country kind of deal. Then you should get a gas powered dirt bike or just a motorcycle. Another benefit of the Sur Ron is it's rechargeable. So instead of having to go buy gas, prices are getting higher for gas as we speak. With the Sur Ron, you just plug it into your wall overnight. It's like 3.5 hours and you're fully charged, ready to go. It maybe costs you 10 cents in electricity, depending on where you live, of course. But your fuel costs for a Sur Ron are going to be significantly less than they would be for a dirt bike. Another benefit is the Sur Ron is cheaper. So this, of course, depends on your locality, but in my experience, a brand new Sur Ron costs about the same as a used, beat up 150, 200cc dirt bike. So Sur Ron is going to be significantly cheaper. However, you're compromising in other areas such as power and range. And they're just different vehicles inherently, as I said previously. Another huge benefit to any electric dirt bike, including the Sur Ron, is it's very low maintenance compared to a gas bike. So I've heard people who own gas dirt bikes say that if you own one, you're going to spend more time fixing it than you are riding it. I'm not exactly sure how true this is since I've never owned a gas dirt bike, but I have heard that it takes quite a bit of maintenance to keep them running smoothly, and this is something you're going to have to consider if you want to own a gas dirt bike, especially a used one, because there are likely going to be some repairs you need to make right off the bat. If you don't have the know-how to do this, then maybe consider buying a new dirt bike or a Sur Ron. Sur Ron, of course, you'll need to do some maintenance as you go, but at least in my opinion, it's easier to work on a Sur Ron that's using a mountain bike platform than it is to rebuild a dirt bike engine. Another benefit of owning a Sur Ron is that it is legally an electric bicycle in many places. This depends on your local laws. However, a lot of places will classify an electric bike that you can ride on the bike lane as a bike that is capped out at about 25 to 29 miles per hour. The Sur Ron comes with the eco mode that caps it at that. However, Luna does give you the disclaimer that if you're using it in sport mode, you're kind of doing it at your own risk, and it's a legal gray zone. However, it also means that you probably don't need to invest in a motorcycle license. It's really hard to register the Sur Ron because it doesn't have a VIN, so the DMV won't let you register it in most cases. But this is going to be very dependent on where you live. I can't give you legal advice, so this is obviously not legal advice, but typically most places are more lenient towards electric bikes than they are towards dirt bikes. And another huge benefit of a Sur Ron over a dirt bike is that it's quiet. So that's what pisses a lot of people off with a gas dirt bike, is that they're super loud, and a lot of times you can't ride it out of your neighborhood because you're going to wake up everybody on the street. With a Sur Ron, that's just not a concern at all. It does make more noise than a lot of electric bikes, but it's not nearly as loud as a gas bike. So moving on to sort of talking about the major benefit of a dirt bike, you're going to be able to find a lot more used dirt bikes for decent prices just because they're more common. They've been around for decades, and there's going to be a lot more aftermarket parts for those dirt bikes and just local parts vendors. With Sur Ron, you're kind of limited to a few manufacturers that make very specialty parts for the Sur Ron. So buying a gas-powered dirt bike is going to open up your options a lot more, as long as you're not buying a rare model. Another major difference between the two is a dirt bike is going to be a lot heavier, and if you buy a dirt bike, you should very much consider getting some really heavy-duty motorcycle boots, because if one of those bikes falls on your ankle, it's probably going to break. One of my friends broke his ankle riding dirt bikes. It happens a lot. It could happen with a Sur Ron as well, but a Sur Ron is on average going to be about half the weight of most gas dirt bikes, so that inherently decreases their risks when you crash it, because you just have less weight coming down on you. So that's something to consider if you're new to the moto scene. You might want to consider getting a Sur Ron to sort of learn on before you go all out and buy a 250cc dirt bike. So now let's talk about some electric dirt bike Sur Ron alternatives here. There are quite a few alternatives out there. However, we're talking drastically different price ranges and a lot of times very different power specs on these different bikes. So here's an overview of the bikes I'm going to talk about right now. I have separate slides showing pictures of each one. Before I move on to each specific bike, I'd like to mention Alta Motors was a company that made seemingly pretty decent electric dirt bikes. However, they went out of business a few years back. But if you're buying used, you might see one of these pop up, and from everything I've read, it seems like a very decent electric dirt bike, comparable to all of the ones I'm listing here. So first off, we got the KTM Freeride. This is from a very large motorcycle manufacturer, KTM. They've made an electric model, so this bike is going to be a lot more true to the classic dirt bike feel. So if you've previously rode gas dirt bikes, you're probably going to like the KTM Freeride. It's got a decent amount of power, however, that comes at a high cost. So MSRP for this bike is $10,699. They will likely charge you shipping if you order it. So it's going to cost you, I would budget about $11,000 for this, over twice as much as the Sur Ron costs. However, it's got very high quality components. I think you could expect a lot out of the suspension on this bike. And from everything I've seen, everyone who owns this bike is very happy with it. It's got more of a standard dirt bike configuration. You'll notice the really fat tire on the back. That's going to give you some really good handling in your typical dirt bike settings. And this bike has about 20 miles of range. Something I'd like to mention about range before talking about these other ones is range on an electric bike is heavily dependent on how you ride. So if you're riding in the city and your bike has regen, you're going to get a lot more range, kind of stop and go, than you are if you're just full throttle the entire time. So that's something to consider when I tell you these ranges. Maybe you own one of these bikes and I tell you it'll go 20 miles on a charge, and you say, no, I got 30 miles on the charge on this bike before. Sure, that's just the average range that most places list, and a lot of places don't list the range because they can't guarantee you're going to get that range, since it depends on how you ride, how fast the wind is blowing. There's so many variables with range, it's hard to give an actual reliable number, but this is sort of the consensus based on the research I've done for each bike. So KTM Freeride will get about 20 miles on a charge, pretty much what I'm getting on a Sur Ron as well. Moving on to the Kalk OR. I'm assuming that stands for off-road. This is a funky looking bike. It's, from what I've seen, it's a pretty good bike. However, it's going to cost you about $13,000, which to me is kind of crazy for what it is. It'll go 50 miles per hour, and they claim about 50 miles of range per charge on this. So it's got a very large battery. However, something that's a slight red flag to me is the massive sprocket on the back, which means that you're going to get more top speed. However, it's going to limit your torque. So I would not buy this if you want to pop wheelies all the time. From everything I've heard, it's a very decent electric dirt bike, but you're going to have to do your own research whether this fits your use case. Each of these dirt bikes I'm about to list is going to sort of fit a different personality. So I just want to let you know about some of the options out there. This is a good option if you really want to go the distance and get that 50 miles per charge. One of the better known electric dirt bikes out there is the Zero FX. There are several different models of Zero electric dirt bikes. The base model is typically going to cost around $9,000, and then they also sell an upgraded version for $11,600. So both of them will go 85 miles per hour, which is actually very good stock. You probably aren't going to benefit from the legal gray zone of electric bikes because the Zero FX is unquestionably an electric motorcycle. So depending on where you live, you're probably going to have to register it to ride it on the road. And that's sort of a set of obstacles that you need to prepare for. A motorcycle license isn't cheap. Registering a vehicle, even if it's a motorcycle, isn't super cheap. However, the Zero FX is going to give you top of the line performance. The base model offers 46 miles of range per charge, and the upgraded model offers 91 miles of range per charge. So in my opinion, those are very impressive range specs for both models, honestly. But this is going to be something that if you already own a motorcycle and you use it to commute everywhere, you're probably going to like the Zero FX if you have the money to spend. It's supposed to be very good for city riding, and you can actually pick like street tires for this bike. So I would say this is probably one of the better Sur Ron alternatives out there. Another option is the Electric Motion Escape. So Electric Motion is more geared towards trials riders. It's very technical riding, and Electric Motors is building electric bikes specifically geared towards these people. So this bike is coming in at $10,300, pretty comparable to the others. You're going to get a top speed of 46 miles per hour, which is more or less the same as the Sur Ron gets. And then you're going to get about 38 miles of range. Again, pretty similar to the Sur Ron. There is an upgraded version of this bike available. However, from what I can tell, they made no upgrades to the powertrain on the improved version. It's just better suspension, better hardware, that kind of stuff. The upgraded version also has a clutch, which is a pretty unique feature for electric dirt bikes. So that's really geared towards the trials crowd. If you do trials all the time, then this is the electric dirt bike for you for sure. If you're just riding the street, maybe not. They also make a trials version of this bike with no seat on it, so something to consider if that rings a bell with you. On to the last alternative is the Kuberg Freerider. As you may notice from just the overall look of this bike, it's a lot more similar to a mountain bike. So this is almost bordering on the class of electric bikes, like classic electric bikes, but it does still have a little bit of that dirt bike look. It uses dirt bike tires, conventional dirt bike tires, or mountain bike tires, my bad. So you can expect this bike to perform similarly to a mountain bike. It's on the cheaper end compared to the other ones. It costs $6,200, and you can expect a 35 mile per hour top speed with about 30 miles of range. Again, very comparable to the Sur Ron. However, you're kind of missing out on some of that top speed, but it's a much lighter bike. It's almost something I feel should have pedals on it so that you could power it yourself. It looks a lot lighter than the Sur Ron, but this is going to fit a very specific use case, and it's going to be less of a legal question whether this classifies as an electric bike or not, because the power limitations put it more in the class 2 electric bike category than in the electric motorcycle category. So finally, say I've convinced you want to buy a Sur Ron. How do you buy one? So the primary reputable distributor of Sur Ron dirt bikes is going to be Luna Cycles. It's a company based out of California, and they are pretty much the main place you're going to buy a Sur Ron from. They're the ones who are selling the new 2022 models, and they are who I would recommend if you are dead set on getting a new Sur Ron. Another option is eBikeZilla. From what I can see, they're completely out of stock, and they're advertising the model of the Sur Ron that's a few years old, so I wouldn't get my hopes up for them. I did find one listing on Alibaba. However, I would not recommend buying from them because they have little to no accountability to US buyers, and their prices are suspiciously low for the Sur Ron. So if you buy from Alibaba, you can expect it to be shipped from China. You can expect little to no quality control. So it's really not a great option. You're not going to get any customer support either. So I would not recommend this option, but if you're feeling cheap and you want to take a risk, then by all means go for it and let me know how it went. In my opinion, one of the better options is to buy used because you can take the bike home. As I mentioned previously, there are Facebook groups dedicated to reselling Sur Rons. I would imagine you can find Facebook groups in the US and in the UK because the UK has probably one of the biggest markets for the Sur Ron of any country. So thank you everybody for watching. I really appreciate your time. I hope you learned something in this video, and maybe I came off as a Sur Ron fanboy in this video, which admittedly I am, but I think the Sur Ron is a great bike, and based on the other options out there, it's one of the more affordable ones. You can squeeze out the higher end power that a lot of these very top end electric bikes have by just putting upgrades into it. So I highly recommend the Sur Ron if you're in the market for something like this, but it really there's an option for everybody out there. So if one of these other options resonated with you, by all means go for that. Do your own research. There's a lot of other electric dirt bikes out there that I didn't mention in this video that may be perfect for you. So check those out. I also want to let you know I'm not an expert. I'm just a guy who owns a Sur Ron, and I'm willing to do a little bit of research for my videos. So, don't be too hard on me here. I'm just giving you my opinions. There's certainly room for dissenting opinions, so feel free to leave those in the comments. But if you don't like my video, just dislike it twice, and we're all good. So, again, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful night, everybody.